My name is Sarah Miller, and I was checking the equipment in the back of Ambulance 32 with a focus that some people might call obsessive. I just call it being thorough. I ran my fingers over the cold metal of the oxygen tanks, checked the seals, and then moved to the defibrillator, making sure the batteries were fully charged and the pads weren't expired. Trauma supplies, medications, backup monitors. Everything had its place, and I needed everything to be in its place. You realize most people don't do a full inventory check at the start of every single shift, right? My partner, Mark Jenkins, called out as he climbed into the driver's seat. He was settling in for the day. That's what the overnight crew is supposed to handle. I just shrugged, not looking up from the trauma supplies. I like to be prepared, I said, and the flat way I said it was meant to end the conversation before it started. Mark had been my partner for about 6 months now. In that time, he'd definitely learned that I kept my personal life completely locked down, probably tighter than the controlled substance cabinet in the back of the rig. I never talked about my family. I never mentioned any jobs I had before this one, and I certainly never told any stories about my life before I became a paramedic. All I brought to the job was work, a professional distance, and an attention to detail that, I admit, bordered on obsessive. Dispatched to 32. We have a call. Possible cardiac arrest, 52-year-old male, at 1847 Morrison Street. I was already moving before the dispatcher finished, securing the equipment bay door. Copy dispatch, 32 is responding. The drive only took us about 4 minutes. I spent that time mentally going over the cardiac arrest protocols, thinking through the drug dosages, and confirming the proper compression rates. It was all information I knew by heart, of course, but I reviewed it anyway. I believed that preparation was what prevented mistakes, and mistakes. I cut that thought off right there before it could fully form. When we arrived, the scene was a controlled kind of chaos. There were family members in the living room panicking, and a man lying on the floor. He was unconscious and not breathing. Mark and I moved with the practiced efficiency of a team that's done this 100 times. My hands were already starting chest compressions, while Mark got the bag valve mask ready to breathe for him. "How long has he been down?" I asked the woman I assumed was his wife. "Maybe 2 minutes? He just collapsed. He was totally fine," she said. And then she just started crying, barely able to get any more words out. My compressions were perfect, exactly the right depth and exactly the right rate, just like I'd practiced. After 2 minutes, we paused for the monitor to analyze, and it advised a shock. We shocked him, and I went right back to CPR. After 4 minutes, we shocked him again. Suddenly, the man's eyes fluttered open. "We've got him back," Mark said, and I could hear the genuine relief in his voice. "Nice work, partner." As we got the patient loaded onto the gurney and into the ambulance, my hands were perfectly steady. My voice was calm as I radioed in the hospital report. I sounded professional, competent, and completely unremarkable. But on the inside, my heart was racing faster than the siren. We were taking this patient to City Central Hospital. City Central was the one place I had sworn to myself I would never go again. It was the one hospital where someone might actually recognize me, a place where the new life I had so carefully built for myself could unravel in just a few seconds. "Sarah," Mark's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. "You okay? You look pretty pale." I just nodded automatically. "Fine. Just focused on the patient." But as we pulled into the City Central ambulance bay, I kept my head down, trying to keep my face partially hidden behind the paperwork I was holding. 12 years. I had managed to avoid this specific hospital for 12 long years. Today, that streak was about to end. The emergency department was busy, which was pretty typical for a Tuesday afternoon. Mark and I wheeled our cardiac patient through the automatic doors, and I could feel my shoulders tense up immediately. "Trauma Bay 3, the charge nurse directed us, barely even glancing up. That was good. A quick handoff, minimal interaction, and then we could get out before anyone looked at me too closely. A resident, Dr. Ben Carter, took the patient report from me. His attention was thankfully on the monitors displaying the man's vital signs, rather than on my face. "Excellent work in the field," he said. "That quick response time likely saved his life." I just nodded. "Just doing our job, doctor," I said, keeping my voice neutral and my eyes focused on the chart. But just as we were getting ready to disconnect our monitor and leave, another doctor walked into the bay. This man was older, with silver hair and that unmistakable air of authority that senior surgeons always seem to have. His name, according to his white coat, was Dr. Robert Anderson, and he was the head of cardiothoracic surgery. The second I saw his face, my blood felt like it turned to ice. I had worked under Dr. Anderson for years, back when I was an entirely different person. "Dr. Carter, I heard we had a successful cardiac save," Anderson was saying, his eyes on the patient's chart. "The paramedics did some excellent work in the field. Where are they?" I was already trying to back out of the room, hoping to blend into the general chaos of the ER. But Mark, who had no idea what was happening, spoke up. "That would be us, doctor. My partner here did most of the work." Dr. Anderson looked up from the chart, and his gaze moved from Mark to me. I watched it happen in slow motion, that flicker of recognition in his eyes. He looked confused at first, then a look of complete certainty, followed immediately by shock. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice careful. "Have we met before?" He was phrasing it as a question, but his tone made it clear he already knew the answer and just couldn't process it. "No, doctor," I said way too quickly. "Just a common face. We need to clear out for the next call." I was out the door before he could say another word, moving so fast that Mark had to jog to keep up with me. "Sarah, what the hell was that? That was rude, even for you." I just kept walking. "We have paperwork to complete," I said, my voice tight. "Let's just go." But once we were back in the ambulance and had cleared the hospital, Mark turned to study my face. "What was that all about?" he asked. "That doctor knew you." I shook my head. "He didn't. Sarah, I saw his face. He absolutely recognized you." Mark's voice started to get more insistent. "Who are you, really? Because I've been your partner for 6 months and I'm starting to think Sarah Miller isn't even your real name." I just stared straight ahead through the windshield, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. "My name is Sarah Miller. I'm a paramedic. That's all you need to know." "Is it?" he shot back. "Because the way you practice medicine, it's not like other paramedics. You know things you shouldn't know. You see patterns before they're obvious. You handle complex cases like you're someone with years and years of advanced medical training." Mark paused for a beat. "Sarah, if you're hiding something, if there's something I should know about my partner..." I cut him off. "There isn't. I'm just good at my job." But that night, alone in my small, quiet apartment, I found myself staring at the locked drawer in my bedroom. Inside that drawer were my medical diplomas, all under a completely different name. There were newspaper clippings from 12 years ago, and a medical license that had been revoked. Stamped across it in big red letters were the words, "Gross negligence, resulting in patient death." Dr. Catherine Reed. That's who I used to be. I was a promising young surgeon with what everyone said was a bright future. That is, until one mistake, one terrible decision, and one patient who died on my operating table had destroyed every bit of it. I had spent the last 12 years rebuilding myself from the ground up as Sarah Miller, paramedic. 12 years of keeping my distance from big hospitals and any doctors who might remember my face. 12 years of hiding from the single worst moment of my life. But tonight, Dr. Anderson had recognized me, and I knew that the carefully constructed wall of silence I'd built around myself was starting to crack. The very next day, I requested that dispatch assign us to a different coverage area. Anything that would keep us away from City Central Hospital. They accommodated the request, sending us to the Northern District, where the hospitals were smaller community facilities, places where I was much less likely to run into doctors from my past. But Mark wasn't letting our conversation from yesterday go. "I did some research last night," he said, while we were taking our lunch break. I kept eating my sandwich, not responding, hoping he'd just drop it. "Sarah Miller, certified paramedic, excellent record. But here's the thing. Your employment history only goes back 8 years. Before that, nothing. No previous jobs, no references, no trail at all." I just kept my eyes on my food. "It's like you didn't even exist before 8 years ago," Mark continued. "Which is weird, right? Because you're what, in your late 30s? Where were you for the first 30 years of your life?" I finally looked at him. "Mark, drop it." "I can't drop it. You're my partner. I need to be able to trust you. And right now, I feel like I'm working with a ghost." Mark leaned forward, his voice softening a little. "Sarah, if you're running from something, if you did something, I just need to know." "I didn't do anything illegal," I said quietly, looking back down at my sandwich. "But you did something. Something you're hiding." Mark's voice was gentle now, not accusatory like before. "Look, I don't care about your past. I really don't. I just care about whether I can trust you in the field. And right now, with all these secrets, I'm not sure I can." Before I could even think of what to say, the radio crackled to life. "Unit 32, we have a multi-vehicle accident on Highway 9. Multiple casualties reported. All available units respond." That conversation was tabled, for now, as we rushed to the scene. It was a horrific crash, a pile-up involving 6 different vehicles. Triage was pure chaos. I moved efficiently through the wrecked cars, assessing casualties, prioritizing who needed help first, and directing other paramedics to the most critical patients. "This one first," I said, kneeling beside a woman who had obvious chest trauma. "She has a pneumothorax and needs decompression before we can transport her." Mark was right behind me. "Sarah, that's not our call to make. We triage and transport. The doctors at the hospital make those treatment decisions." "She'll die before we reach the hospital," I said, already reaching into my bag for a needle. "I can decompress it right here and stabilize her for the transport." "That is way outside our scope of practice, Sarah." "Then don't watch," I said. And I performed the needle decompression with the confidence of someone who had done it hundreds of times before. The woman's breathing improved almost immediately. We loaded her up and rushed to the nearest trauma center, which, of course, just had to be City Central. This time, Dr. Anderson was waiting in the trauma bay when we arrived. "The paramedic who performed the field decompression," Dr. Anderson said immediately, his voice loud. "I need to speak with her." My stomach just dropped. "I need to get my unit back in service, Doctor." "Now," he said, and his voice carried an authority that you just couldn't ignore. He led me into a private consultation room nearby, closed the door, and turned to face me. "Dr. Reed, or should I be calling you Sarah Miller?" I didn't say anything. "I thought I recognized you yesterday," he went on, "but I just couldn't believe it. Catherine Reed, one of the most promising young surgeons I ever trained, working as a paramedic under a false name. Dr. Anderson's expression was a complicated mix of confusion, concern, and something else that almost looked like pity. "What happened to you, Catherine?" I finally found my voice. "I'm not Dr. Reed anymore," I said quietly. "That person doesn't exist." "Because of the David Stone case," he stated. I flinched when he said the name. David Stone. The patient who died on my table 12 years ago. The case that had ended my entire career. "You lost your license?" Anderson continued. "Gross negligence," they said. "I have to tell you, I never believed it. You were always too careful, too skilled. But you didn't fight the ruling. You just disappeared." "I didn't fight it because I was guilty," I said, and my voice sounded hollow and distant. David Stone died because I made the wrong decision. Because I was arrogant enough to think I could save a patient with a condition I'd only ever read about in textbooks. "You were trying to save his life, Catherine." "I killed him," I interrupted. "And I have spent 12 years living with that. 12 years rebuilding myself into someone who can't make those kinds of mistakes anymore. Someone who works within strict protocols and never exceeds their scope of practice. Except you just performed a needle decompression in the field," he pointed out, "which is the very definition of exceeding your scope of practice." My hands were shaking now. She would have died. I couldn't let someone else die just because I was too afraid to act. Dr. Anderson was quiet for a long moment, just studying me. "Catherine, do you have any idea what happened after the Stone case? After you just vanished?" All I knew was that I'd lost my license. I knew I could never be a doctor again. "Do you know that the medical board reopened your case 3 years ago?" he continued, his voice steady. "That new evidence came to light, suggesting the patient had an undiagnosed clotting disorder that would have killed him regardless of what treatment you tried. That you were, in fact, exonerated, posthumously, as it were." I just stared at him, unable to process the words. "What?" "You are not guilty of negligence, Dr. Reed. You never were. The patient's family provided some additional medical history that wasn't in the original files. The board officially reversed its decision. Your license, it could be reinstated." The room felt like it was tilting. "That's not possible," I whispered. "I killed him. I made the wrong call." "You made the best call you could with the information you had," Anderson said firmly. "Medicine isn't about being perfect. It's about doing your best with incomplete information under impossible pressure." He pulled out his phone, looked something up, and then took out a business card. "Dr. Reed, Catherine, you've been living under this cloud of guilt for 12 years, all based on a ruling that was overturned. You can come back. You can practice medicine again." I felt tears on my face that I hadn't even realized were falling. "I don't know how to be her anymore," I whispered. "Dr. Reed, she's gone. I'm just Sarah Miller now." "Then maybe Sarah Miller needs to learn that running from your past doesn't make it go away," he said gently. "It just makes you smaller." He handed me the business card. "This is the contact at the medical board. Call them. Learn the truth for yourself, and then you can decide who you want to be." After Dr. Anderson left, I just sat there alone in that small, sterile room, holding a business card that promised to give me back everything I'd lost 12 years ago. The question was, did I have the courage to reach for it? Or would I just keep hiding, keep running, keep being Sarah Miller instead of Catherine Reed? I honestly didn't know. But for the first time in 12 years, I had a choice. And that terrified me more than anything else. I sat in that consultation room for probably 20 minutes after Dr. Anderson left, just staring at that little white business card. Medical Licensing Board. A phone number. A name. Ms. Julia Evans, Director of Licensure Review. One single phone call. That's all it would take to find out if what Dr. Anderson said was true. To find out if 12 years of guilt and hiding had all been based on a ruling that didn't even stand anymore. But I couldn't make myself dial the number. Because if it was true, if I really had been exonerated, then it meant I'd wasted 12 years of my life. 12 years of living with diminished dreams, of actively hiding my skills, of being so much less than I could have been. And if it wasn't true, if Dr. Anderson was wrong or misremembering, then I'd just be ripping open old wounds that had barely even scarred over. "Sarah?" Mark's voice came from the doorway. "You okay in there? Dispatch is asking about our availability." I quickly pocketed the card. "Fine," I said. "Let's go." But he had already seen my face. "What did that doctor say to you?" "It was nothing important." "Sarah, I said it's nothing, Mark. Can we please just do our job?" The rest of the shift was incredibly tense. We were punctuated by calls that all felt completely routine compared to the turmoil that was happening inside my head. A diabetic emergency, a man with a broken leg, a child having an asthma attack. These were all cases I could handle with my eyes closed, using only a tiny fraction of the knowledge I actually possessed, knowledge I'd spent 12 years pretending not to have. At the end of our shift, as we were cleaning and restocking the ambulance, Mark finally confronted me again. "I know something's going on. I know that Doctor recognized you, and I know you're carrying something really heavy that's starting to affect your work." He paused, leaning against the side of the rig. "Sarah, I'm your partner. You don't have to tell me everything, but you have to tell me enough that I can trust you." I was silent for a long moment, just wiping down a countertop. Then, finally, I said, "What if I told you that I used to be someone else? Someone who made a terrible mistake and lost everything because of it?" "I'd say everyone has a past," Mark replied, not missing a beat. "Everyone makes mistakes." He leaned against the ambulance, crossing his arms. "The real question is whether you learned from it, whether you're better now than you were then." "I don't know if I am," I admitted, my voice quiet. "I've spent 12 years being less than I was, playing it safe, never taking any risks. I've been so afraid of making another mistake that I stopped being the person I was supposed to be." "Or maybe," he suggested, "you became a different person, one who's saved hundreds of lives in the field, one who never gives up on a patient, one who performed an emergency decompression today because she knew it was the right thing to do, even if it was against the rules." Mark met my eyes. "Sarah, I don't know who you used to be, but I know who you are now. And that person is one hell of a paramedic." I felt something crack inside my chest. It wasn't breaking exactly, but more like opening. "What if I told you I used to be a surgeon?" I said, the words tasting strange. "And I lost my license because a patient died." Mark didn't even look shocked. "I'd say that explains a lot. It explains how you practice medicine, why you see things that other paramedics miss." He paused. "Is that what you're hiding? That you used to be a doctor?" "Yes. And I changed my name because I couldn't face being that person anymore. I couldn't face the guilt and the shame and the knowledge that I'd failed." "Did you fail?" he asked. "Or did you just experience what every single doctor experiences eventually? The reality that you can't save everyone?" I pulled the business card Dr. Anderson had given me out of my pocket. "The doctor today, Dr. Anderson. He said my case was reopened, that I was exonerated, that it wasn't my fault after all. And you don't believe him?" "I don't know what to believe," I said, staring at the card. If it's true, it means I've been wrong about myself for 12 years, that I've been hiding from a guilt I didn't even need to carry, that I've wasted more than a decade of my life. Mark was quiet for a moment. Or, he said, it means you get a second chance, a chance to be who you were always supposed to be, a chance to use all that knowledge and skill and training instead of keeping it hidden. He nodded at the card in my hand. Make the call, Sarah. Learn the truth, and then you can decide who you want to be moving forward. That night, I sat in my apartment with my phone in one hand and that business card in the other. It was 9:00 p.m., much too late to call the medical board. I'd have to wait until morning. That meant I had a long, sleepless night ahead of me, thinking about David Stone, about the surgery that had gone so wrong, about the moment I'd realized he was dying, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I thought about the medical board hearing where they'd ruled I was negligent, reckless, and unfit to practice medicine. And I thought about 12 years of living as half a person, using half my skills, being half of what I could have been. At 8:00 a.m. the next morning, before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed the number. Medical Licensing Board. Ms. Evans speaking. Ms. Evans, my name was Dr. Catherine Reed. I was told my case was reopened and the ruling was reversed. I need to know if that's true. There was a pause on the other end, just the sound of a keyboard clicking. Dr. Reed, we've been trying to reach you for 3 years. Where have you been? That's complicated, I said. Is it true? Was I exonerated? Yes. The Stone family provided additional medical records showing the patient had Factor V Leiden, an undiagnosed clotting disorder. The hematology experts who reviewed the case all testified that no treatment protocol at that time would have saved him. The board's initial ruling was based on incomplete information. Ms. Evans's voice was kind. Dr. Reed, you were completely cleared of all negligence. Your license can be reinstated, provided you complete a standard re-entry program. Did you not receive any of our letters? I changed my name, I stammered. I changed my whole life. I thought I could never practice medicine again. You can, she said firmly. You absolutely can. But Dr. Reed, why did you disappear? Why didn't you fight the initial ruling? My voice was barely a whisper. Because I believed I was guilty. Because I thought I deserved to lose everything. Well, you were wrong, she said gently. And now you have a choice. You can stay hidden, or you can come back to medicine. But Dr. Reed, the medical community needs good doctors. We need doctors who care deeply, who take patient deaths seriously, and who hold themselves accountable. That sounds like you. Don't let 12 years of guilt keep the world from benefiting from your skills. After I hung up the phone, I just sat there in silence, trying to process it all. Everything Dr. Anderson had said was true. I had been exonerated. I could be a doctor again. The only question was, did I have the courage to stop being Sarah Miller and become Dr. Catherine Reed again? Or had 12 years of hiding changed me so fundamentally that I could never go back? I didn't know the answer, but I was about to find out. I didn't go back to work immediately. I called in sick for the first time in 8 years, telling dispatch I had a stomach bug. I just needed time to process the revelation that had completely shattered the world I had so carefully constructed. For 12 years, I'd been Sarah Miller, the reliable paramedic. I was safe, I was limited, and I was hiding. Now, I had to decide if I could somehow become Dr. Catherine Reed again. I finally went to the locked drawer, the one I hadn't opened in years, and used the small key I kept hidden. Inside, My medical diploma stared back at me. Catherine Margaret Reed, Doctor of Medicine, Johns Hopkins University, summa cum laude. I had been at the top of my class, with a future that had once seemed limitless. Below the diplomas were the newspaper clippings I'd saved. Surgeon loses license after patient death. Medical board rules negligence in stone case. Promising career ends in tragedy. And at the very bottom there was a photo of David Stone, smiling with his family, his wife, and 3 young children. I had kept this photo as a kind of penance, a constant reminder, as proof that my guilt was justified. And now Ms. Evans was telling me that the guilt had been misplaced, that David Stone would have died regardless of my actions, that his undiagnosed clotting disorder had made survival impossible. But I had carried the weight of his death for 12 years. How could I just let it go? My phone rang, making me jump. It was Mark. "Sarah, I know you're processing a lot right now, but we've got a major situation. There's been a building collapse downtown, a mass casualty incident. They're calling in every available paramedic, even off duty." I didn't even hesitate. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Because whatever I was dealing with personally, people needed help. And I, whether I was Sarah Miller or Catherine Reed, couldn't ignore that call. The collapse site was pure chaos. A 5-story apartment building had partially pancaked after a gas explosion. There were dozens of people trapped, and the injuries ranged from minor cuts to critical, life-threatening trauma. I arrived and immediately fell into triage mode, assessing victims with a practiced efficiency. But as I worked, I found myself making medical decisions that went far beyond standard paramedic protocols, making diagnostic observations that required a physician's level of knowledge. "This patient has compartment syndrome developing in his leg," I told a younger paramedic, pointing to the swelling and color. "Mark him for immediate surgical consultation when he gets to the hospital." "How can you tell that?" he asked, looking confused. "From the swelling pattern and the neurovascular signs," I said. "Just trust me. Mark him as urgent." As the afternoon wore on, I found myself naturally taking a command role, coordinating the medical response on the ground with an authority that came from years of surgical training I'd kept buried. Dr. Anderson appeared, leading the trauma team from City Central. He saw me and immediately made his way over. "Dr. Reed, you called the medical board." "I did," I said, continuing to work as I talked, my hands never stopping as I started a new IV. "You were right. I was exonerated 3 years ago." "And?" he pressed. "And I don't know what to do with that information," I admitted. "I've been Sarah Miller for so long that I don't know how to be Catherine Reed anymore." Dr. Anderson gestured to the disaster site all around us. "You're already being her. Look at how you're working. That's physician-level triage. Those are advanced diagnostics. That's command presence. Sarah Miller is a paramedic. Dr. Reed is leading a mass casualty response." "But I killed David Stone," I whispered, the old guilt flaring up. "No, you didn't," he said firmly. "His clotting disorder killed him. You tried to save him with the information you had." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "Catherine, you can keep punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault, or you can honor David Stone's memory by using your skills to save others. What do you think he would want?" Before I could answer, a call came from the rescue teams working on the collapsed structure. "We need medical personnel inside. We've got survivors trapped on the 3rd floor, but the structure is unstable. We need someone who can do emergency stabilization before we can even think about moving them." The fire chief approached our medical team. "I need a doctor who is willing to go in. It's dangerous. The building could collapse further at any moment, but we've got at least 3 critical patients in there who won't survive the transport without immediate intervention." I felt all my training kicking in, the same training that had made me a promising surgeon, the same instinct that had pulled me into medicine in the first place. I'll go, I said. Dr. Anderson looked at me sharply. Sarah. To Reed, I corrected myself, my voice shaking but clear. My name is Dr. Catherine Reed, and I'm volunteering to go in. The fire chief studied me. Are you qualified for emergency field surgery? Johns Hopkins trained, I said, meeting his gaze. 12 years of emergency medicine experience, including 8 years of field trauma. My voice was steady now. I'm qualified. Dr. Anderson gripped my shoulder. Catherine, you don't have to prove anything. Yes, I do, I said, meeting his eyes. Not to you, to myself. For 12 years I've been hiding because I was terrified of making another mistake. But those people in there, they need someone who's willing to take the risk, someone who won't let fear paralyze them, someone who remembers that medicine is about saving lives, not about protecting yourself from failure. I turned to the fire chief. Get me a medical kit and show me where they are. As I started following the firefighters toward the unstable building, Mark caught up with me. Sarah, Dr. Reed, whatever your name is, I'm coming with you. Mark, you don't have to do this. Yeah, I do, he said, adjusting the straps on his own pack. You're my partner, and partners don't let each other go into danger alone. He gave me a slight, nervous grin. Besides, I want to see what a real surgeon looks like in action. Inside the collapsed building, we found 3 patients. There was a woman with a crushed pelvis, a man with severe chest trauma, and a child with a compound fracture of his leg. I assessed them rapidly, my mind falling into the familiar, precise pattern of emergency triage. The woman first, I said. She's bleeding internally. Then the man. The child is stable enough to wait. I knelt beside the woman, and my hands moved with the confidence of someone who had done this thousands of times. I wasn't a paramedic following protocols anymore. I was a surgeon making life-or-death decisions. I need to compress the bleeding, I told Mark, my hands already working inside the woman's abdominal cavity with a precision that made him stare. This is way outside normal field protocols, but she'll die if I don't. Then do it, Mark said simply. I trust you. For the next 40 minutes, I was Dr. Catherine Reed again. I wasn't hiding, I wasn't holding back, and I wasn't afraid to use every single skill I possessed. I managed to stabilize the woman, treated the man's pneumothorax, and splinted the child's leg, all while the building groaned and shifted around us. When the rescue teams finally extracted all 3 patients, all alive, I emerged from the building covered in dust and blood. My hands were shaking from the adrenaline, but my eyes were clear. Dr. Anderson was waiting right at the entrance. All 3 patients are going to make it, he said, a look of awe on his face. You saved their lives. We saved their lives, I corrected, nodding toward Mark and the rescue team. No, Dr. Anderson said firmly. Sarah Miller might have triaged them and waited for extraction. Dr. Catherine Reed went into an unstable building and performed emergency procedures that kept them alive. There's a difference. I looked down at my hands. They were surgeons' hands, hands that had been pretending to be a paramedic's for 12 years, hands that had just saved 3 lives because I'd finally stopped hiding what they could do. What happens now? Mark asked, coming up beside me. Now, I said slowly, I have to decide who I want to be. Sarah Miller, the paramedic who plays it safe, or Dr. Catherine Reed, the surgeon who takes risks to save lives. Can't you be both? Mark suggested. Can't you be Dr. Reed, who learned a few things from being Sarah Miller? Someone who has all the skills of a surgeon, but also the humility of someone who's experienced failure. I considered that. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I didn't have to choose between Sarah and Catherine. Maybe I could integrate them both, the skilled surgeon I had been, and the cautious, thoughtful person I had become. "Dr. Reed," Dr. Anderson said, "the medical board can fast-track your reinstatement if you're willing to complete the re-entry program. It would be about 3 months of supervised practice, and then you'd have your full license restored. Are you interested?" I thought about David Stone. I thought about 12 years of hiding. And I thought about the 3 patients who had just survived because I'd finally stopped being afraid to use my skills. "Yes," I said. "I'm interested. But I have one condition." "What's that?" "I want to work in emergency medicine, not surgery. I've learned that I'm better when I have to make quick decisions, without time to overthink everything, when I have to trust my instincts instead of second-guessing myself." Dr. Anderson smiled. "I think that can be arranged. Welcome back, Dr. Reed." 3 months later, I was Dr. Catherine Reed, and I was standing in my new office at City Central Hospital's emergency department. It wasn't huge, and it wasn't prestigious, but it was mine. I'd earned it through 12 weeks of intensive supervised practice, where I'd proven that I could still practice medicine at the highest level. My reinstated medical license hung on the wall right next to my diplomas. And next to that, I'd put up a photo of the 3 patients from the building collapse, all of them recovered and healthy. But I'd also kept one thing from my life as Sarah Miller: my paramedic certification. I had it framed right next to the others, because those 8 years hadn't been wasted. They had taught me field medicine, practical triage, and a level of humility that my younger, more arrogant surgeon self had desperately needed. Mark appeared in my doorway. He'd used my return as motivation and was now working as a physician assistant in the ER. "Dr. Reed, we've got a multi-trauma coming in from a car wreck. Thought you might want to take the lead." "Absolutely," I said. Catherine, stood up and pulled on my white coat. It felt strange after 12 years, but it also felt right, like coming home. In the ER, I worked with the same precision I'd shown in the field, but this time it was without the fear that had haunted me for so long. When I made decisions, I made them confidently, informed by both my surgical training and my paramedic experience. "Dr. Reed," a young resident approached me after the trauma was stabilized. "That was incredible. The way you managed that case. Where did you train?" "Johns Hopkins for medical school," I said. "But I learned my most important lessons working as a paramedic for 8 years." I smiled at him. "Never underestimate what you can learn by starting over." That evening, I visited the cemetery for the first time in 12 years. I found David Stone's grave. I had been too afraid to come before, too consumed by my own guilt. Now I knelt and placed a small bouquet of flowers by the headstone. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," I said quietly. "And I'm sorry I let your death define me for so long, instead of letting it teach me. But I'm trying to do better now. I'm trying to honor your memory by saving others." I paused, taking a breath. "I hope that's enough." I didn't expect an answer, but just saying the words out loud helped. It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't sure I'd ever fully forgive myself. But it was acceptance. It was an understanding that I'd done my best with the information I had, and that sometimes, despite everything we do, patients still die. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ms. Evans at the medical board. "Dr. Reed, I have a request. Would you be willing to speak at an upcoming conference about physician wellness and recovery? Your story, about losing your license, rebuilding yourself, and returning to medicine. It could help other doctors who are facing similar struggles." I typed back, "Yes, I'd be honored." Because maybe that was the real lesson. Not that I'd failed with David Stone, but that I had survived the failure. I'd fallen as far as a doctor could possibly fall, and I had found a way back. Other physicians needed to know that failure wasn't final. That losing everything didn't mean you couldn't rebuild. That shame and guilt could be transformed into wisdom and compassion. Walking back to my car, I caught my reflection in the dark hospital windows. It wasn't Sarah Miller, hiding behind protocols and fear. And it wasn't the arrogant young surgeon who'd once thought she was invincible. It was Dr. Catherine Reed, someone who had experienced the worst of her profession and emerged stronger, wiser, and more human. For 12 years, I'd hidden my past. But the emergency that had forced me to reveal it hadn't destroyed me after all. It had freed me. It freed me to be the doctor I was always meant to be. Skilled, but humble. Confident, but cautious. Experienced in both success and failure. I'd spent 12 years running from Catherine Reed, but Sarah Miller had taught me how to be a better version of that person. And now, finally, I could integrate both identities into someone whole. Dr. Catherine Reed, ER physician, former paramedic, and survivor of failure. Living proof that your worst moment doesn't have to define you. I had hidden my past for 12 years. Now I wore it openly, not as a badge of shame, but as a badge of hard-won wisdom. And tomorrow, I'd use that wisdom to save more lives. 6 months after returning to medicine, I stood on a stage in front of 200 physicians at the National Conference on Medical Professional Wellness. I was about to share the story I had hidden for 12 long years. My name is Dr. Catherine Reed, I began, my voice steady, and 12 years ago, I killed a patient. The room went completely silent. At least, I continued, that's what I believed for over a decade. I was a promising young surgeon, arrogant enough to attempt a procedure I'd only read about in textbooks. My patient died. The medical board ruled negligence. I lost my license, I lost my identity, and I lost my belief that I ever deserved to practice medicine. I paused, looking out at the faces in the audience. They were doctors at all stages of their careers, and I knew every one of them was carrying their own burdens of guilt and fear. For 12 years, I hid. I changed my name, I became a paramedic, and I told myself I was protecting patients by limiting my scope of practice. But really, I was just protecting myself from the possibility of failing again. I clicked to the next slide, which showed David Stone's photo. This was my patient, David Stone. He was a husband, a father, and a construction worker. He died because he had an undiagnosed clotting disorder that made his condition untreatable. I didn't kill him. His disease did. But I spent 12 years believing I was guilty. I clicked again, showing a slide of my exoneration papers. 3 years ago, the medical board reversed their decision. New evidence proved I wasn't negligent, but I had disappeared so completely that I never received the notification. I continued hiding, continued believing the worst about myself, and continued living as half the doctor I could have been. My next slide showed a picture of the building collapse. Then this happened. A mass casualty event that required someone who was willing to take risks to save lives. And I realized that my 12 years of hiding weren't protecting patients. They were depriving them of skills and knowledge they needed. I looked directly at the audience. How many of you are carrying guilt about a patient you couldn't save? How many of you lie awake at night replaying your decisions, wondering if you could have done something differently? How many of you are limiting your practice, avoiding certain procedures, or holding back your skills because you're terrified of making another mistake? Hands rose all throughout the room, more than half the audience. I'm not here to tell you that guilt is wrong, or that you should just get over it, I continued. I'm here to tell you that guilt can teach you without having to destroy you. That failure can make you a better doctor without making you a fearful one, that you can acknowledge your mistakes and learn from them without letting them define you. I shared statistics on physician suicide rates, on burnout, on early retirement due to unprocessed trauma. Then I shared solutions, peer support programs, mental health resources, and most importantly, the courage to be honest about our failures instead of hiding them. For 12 years, I was Sarah Miller, paramedic. And you know what? Those years weren't wasted. They taught me humility, practical skills, and a perspective I never had as a young surgeon. They made me a better doctor. I smiled. But I also learned that hiding from your potential doesn't protect anyone. It just makes you smaller. After the presentation, dozens of doctors approached me, sharing their own stories of failure, guilt, and fear. A surgeon who'd lost a patient during what should have been a routine procedure. An ER doctor who'd missed a crucial diagnosis. A pediatrician who'd made a medication error. Each one of them was carrying the weight of mistakes that their profession demanded they be perfect enough to avoid. "You're the first speaker who's ever been honest about failure," one older physician told me, with tears in her eyes. "Everyone else talks about resilience and wellness, but nobody admits that sometimes we make mistakes and that sometimes patients die despite our best efforts. Thank you for being brave enough to say it out loud." That evening, I was in my hotel room reviewing messages on my laptop. One stood out. "Dr. Reed, this is Janet Stone, David's widow. I heard about your presentation from a friend who was attending, and I wanted to reach out. I'm so glad you finally learned the truth about David's condition. I'm so sorry that our delayed medical records caused you so much pain all these years. If it helps at all, David would have been proud that his death taught you lessons that helped you save other people. Thank you for honoring his memory by becoming a better doctor. Janet." I read the message 3 times, tears streaming down my face. For 12 years, I'd imagined the Stone family hating me, blaming me. Instead, Janet was thanking me for learning from the tragedy. I typed back, "Janet, thank you so much for this message. Your husband's death changed me profoundly. I'm so sorry I couldn't save him, but I promise I'm using everything I learned to save others. I hope that provides some small comfort." The response came within minutes. "It does. David always believed in redemption and second chances. He'd want you to keep practicing medicine, keep saving lives, and keep being the doctor he needed, even if you couldn't be that for him. Be well, Dr. Reed." I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, patients needed doctors. Doctors who were skilled, but also human. Doctors who understood that medicine wasn't about perfection. It was about doing your best with incomplete information, learning from your failures, and having the courage to keep trying, despite the fear. For 12 years, I'd let one failure define me. Now, I was letting it teach me instead. Dr. Catherine Reed was back. Not the arrogant young surgeon she'd once been, but someone better. Someone who'd been broken and rebuilt, who'd experienced the worst and emerged wiser, who'd learned that true strength came not from avoiding failure, but from surviving it. Tomorrow, I'd return to City Central's ER. I'd treat patients, teach residents, and continue using the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd hit bottom and clawed their way back. I'd hidden my past for 12 years, but the medical emergency that forced me to reveal it had given me back my future. And I was going to make every single day of that future count.